Hey, good morning, sixth grade students. This is going to be our first video of the year. Today, what we're going to do is I'm going to explain a little bit further about your 9/11 interview project. We talked about a lot in class, but I also wanted to create a quick video for you because I know that there are some families that some students that because of our storm earlier this week, it might be difficult for people to get to class. So I figured I might make a video to help you out a little bit. I'm going to walk you through a little bit about how we are going to begin working on our assignment this week. And so hopefully you can refer to this video at any time to get an idea of at least how to get started with the project. So I'm going to try to walk you through that right now. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is if you go into Canvas, what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to see that there's a module created called 9/11 Interview Project, and then there's these different steps along the way. If you see something in this left-hand category here, it's referred to as a page. These aren't assignments. This is just kind of background information to help you out. Um, The interview questions are things that I'm going to be handing out in class, and the interview questions can be accessed here. If you need another copy, they can be accessed anytime. Also, there's a newspaper article or format the finalization of our project is located here. The big picture of what we are going to be doing with this project, and I know it's very different from ancient civilizations, which is what I told you the focus was going to be this year. As we approach September 11th. It's a very significant date in history, a very significant event before you're born, something that you're familiar with, but most likely you don't know the whole story. What's interesting about the situation that you're in is that you have adults in your lives that you can go to and you can ask for um, what we call an oral history. You can have somebody speak history, something that a family member, maybe a neighbor, a friend of the family, actually went through. As I mentioned in class, for me, when I was growing up, the an example that was similar to this was the assassination of John F. Kennedy. It was something that I didn't live through, but something that the adults in my life had lived through, and I could ask them what things were like that day. This oral history is going to be given to us in this assignment that you see as we outline those interview questions. What I want to do is I want to show you the interview questions, give you an idea of what that looks like. Um, and then you can get started on. I'm going to try to give you some hints along the way for how to complete things. You can click on this on your end in your interview project module. You'll see the questions come up here. Again, these questions are things that I handed out on in paper in class, but they are things that you can also access here electronically online. If you would like to type up the answers to these interview questions, you can certainly do that. You can write them down as well. So I'm just going to go over the directions for you as I read at the top of the page here. I'm going to try to. These are all my little tools that I use here. So I'm going to read the instructions. Um, the name that would be your name up at the top here. Um, and so the interviewee, that would be the person that you are interviewing. So if you're interviewing your dad, for example, it would be your dad's name here. And it doesn't need to be in that form. So you're not going to just like for your interviewee's name, you're not going to write dad or mom. You actually write out what their name is, and you can see that there are the 5 questions that are located here with an extra credit question at the bottom as well. Okay. Okay, so I'll read at the top here. The directions. Pretend you are a news reporter. Interview one person who remembers the events of September 11th, 2001. In addition to these questions, you may also ask questions of your own. Please ask your interviewee for additional details if he or she does not elaborate enough for you. Also, do not duplicate information in answering your questions. If this occurs, ask your interviewee to elaborate more. Remember, you'll need one good quote from your interviewee. Typically, this can be obtained in question 5. I'll go over that in a moment. Don't forget to be a good listener, take careful notes, and thank your interviewee for his or her time. The person you decide to interview, you're going to put that person's name here. Again, your interviewee's name does not have to be a family member. That's probably going to be the easiest avenue for you to take to have it be a family member, but it certainly does not need to be. I would also encourage you to, some of you in class said, "Oh, my uncle or my uncle's friend or this person that I know, they actually were they were actually in Manhattan that day, and they have this very interesting story that they tell. It's going to be more interesting for you as a reporter if you have people like that in your life to ask them what their story is. Um, so if you can, try to gravitate towards those people. I do have a note here for the interviewee. That's the person that you're interviewing. Um, And just a note for them that from this interview, each student will be writing a newspaper article, at least 10 sentences in length. Please provide enough information so the students can complete the task. Also, if there's additional details you'd like to share, please feel free. Thank you for your time and being a part of this assignment with our students. So I give you an outline of 5 different questions. And as I said a moment ago, this paper that you're going to be working on, whether you're typing it up or writing it up, think of it as kind of like taking notes. Okay, so this doesn't need to be something that's formally written. It can be something that, as you're listening to your interview with your person, you're going to kind of write some of the highlights of what you hear him or her talking about. I'll go over the questions just real quick with you. Um, and then you're going to want to remind your person to. You may have to remind your person to elaborate with some details. Um, Number one, on September 11th, provide some details about how you learned about the attacks on the World Trade Center. Throughout the document, or even some of our readings or videos, you're going to see WTC very often given as the acronym for World Trade Center. That's what that stands for. Approximately 3 to 4 sentences is what we're going to look to get out of this. Okay, but again, right now you can just write down what the main parts are. Think of this as like kind of taking notes. What were you doing at the time of the attacks, and what were some of your first reactions when you heard the news of the passenger plane crashing into the World Trade Center? After learning of the attacks, what was the rest of the day like for you? What were some of the feelings or emotions that you had on that day? What are the images that have stayed with you in your mind from that day? Being an individual that lived through the events of September 11th, 2001, and remembering that this generation of students were not yet born when those events occurred, what would you like to say about this historical event almost 20 years later? There's an extra credit section at the bottom where you can ask your own questions. You might find that your interviewee has mentioned something, and you might want to know more about that event. There might be some additional information that you would like to know, something that you're more curious about. And so you can ask those additional questions for extra credit there at the bottom. Also, try to write down information that you don't want to have your information repeated. Okay, so if, for example, in number 1, it says provide details about how you learned about the attacks. Many of the adults in your life are going to mention that they heard about the attacks when they were uh, when they were listening to events take place on the radio. Uh, for number 2, what were you doing at the time of the attacks? Let's not. You don't want to have for this section um, listening to the radio, because that's the same thing that you have in section 1. Perhaps on the way to work, something about being on the way to work, or being on the way to drop off a child at daycare, something like that, since it took place in the morning. You're going to want your information to be varied, and I'll review that again in class. There are some parts as we get to later parts of the interview, specifically number 4, talking about the images that have stayed with you. Um, you want to be delicate if something is, we might find that information that's being shared by the adults in our lives. It was a very emotional day for many of us as adults. So we need to be considerate of that. And be understanding. And if it's something that somebody doesn't want to go into a whole lot of the detail with, we need to respect that from our interviewees, and just kind of keep that in mind, especially with number 4, which typically becomes a very emotional question for our interviewees to answer. Don't forget at the end of your interview, even though their mom or dad or most likely a family member, make sure you're thanking them for their time and for their input. The reason why I'm giving you this video now, a few days in advance of when this is going to be due, is because over the long weekend, I thought it might be a benefit for you since you'll have 4 days off. I thought it might be I thought it might be a nice idea for you to be able to. It might be a time where you're spending time with family members, so that way you can ask those family members to help you out with some answers to questions. I know we are currently working on our continents and oceans activity because of the weather the other day. We needed to. We're going to have kind of an open due date for that assignment, but I did want to give you an idea of what these 9/11 questions were going to look like in part 1 of talking about our video, or talking about our interview questions rather. Again, you can access through the module 9/11 interview project. You can access these questions by going to interview questions. Again, they don't need to be typed up. They can be if you want. You can just print them out, write them up. I'll give you a hard copy in class. But if you want an additional copy of the questions, you can access those here.